Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 8th session of the 6th cycle of the workshop that was presented on June 15, 2024, where we completed steps 6 and 7. Next week we'll begin step 8. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as He did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that He will make all things right if I surrender to His will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with Him forever in the next. Amen. So we're actually starting looking at the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. And we have to realize that merely reading the book without experiencing it is interesting, but not necessarily useful if we're not going to apply what it is that it says. You can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. You can read all the instructions, you can understand the buoyancy in the water and all that kind of stuff, but until you jump in the water, you can't learn how to swim. So that's what we're doing here, is we're actually jumping in to the Big Book in applying what it says. Because when we look in the Big Book, the cover page states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Recovered, not recovering, we have recovered. That's what it says. The definition of recovered means that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice whether I drink or not, because I don't even think about drinking. I turn to God instead of alcohol automatically when I'm upset. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. Another definition comes from the 10th step promise, which is on page 84. And this has become a way of life for me. And it states, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react, so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So that's the 10th step promise. Then from page 27 of the big book, it defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Additionally, the appendix, the spiritual experience, describes recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And lastly, the foreword to the first edition states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And it later goes on to say, the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So we're already more than halfway through these steps. We started with step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And that's where we really get into the self-knowledge that, oh my gosh, this is me. This is my problem. I am a real alcoholic. However, I have to remember that as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which then brings us to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the thing that's great about that is that I'm the one who decides what and who that power greater than me is. And then once I go through and I decide what that power is, I only have to answer one question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I say yes to that, then I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. In step 3, I'm only making the decision. That's all I'm doing. And in step 3, I go to the 3rd step prayer, which is on page 63 of the big book, which is where I offer myself to God. And I'm asking to be able to do God's will. As I start to move on with that, I start to prepare myself to do it. I don't turn my will and my life over to the care of God.
I don't turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him in the third step. I only make a decision to do it. And then the next steps prepare me to do that, starting with step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, the fourth step consists of 4 inventories for my resentments, which is the biggies, the fears, and the harms that I have done to others in my life, excluding my sex conduct and including my sex conduct. And what we start looking at is understanding our character defects. And that's where we found that in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem or security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And when we look at those parts of self are our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, and our personal relationships, and our sex relationships. And that boiled down to where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Even though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? We're looking at ourselves. The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. And these are the 5 main character defects that we are looking at for all of the inventories. And they are: I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. And the whole idea between looking at these character defects is that we have to understand that we also have these 5 main character defects, and then they break down into other character defects. And we have this list of other character defects, which rolls up under them. And the idea is we have to realize that the same situations will repeat themselves as long as a character defect continues to play out. We repeat what we don't repair. Therefore, we continue to be unhappy and wonder, why me? Why me? Why does this always happen to me? We find ourselves in the same situations, only the faces change. But we're in the same situation. And remember that it's not the person listed, but it's the character defects that come into play. So when we start looking at ourselves, we're looking at our character defects, not only in our resentment inventory, but in our fears inventory and in our harms inventory. Now, there's a difference between the resentment inventory and the harms inventory, because when we talked about the parts of self in the resentment inventory, the parts of self are wounded. In the harms inventory, the parts of self are satisfied, but it's still the part of self. So that brings us in getting ready. Once we go through and we do all of these inventories and we focus on listing our character defects, then we did our 5th step, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, it's important to note here that step 5 is done so that you can see what's blocking you off from your higher power, the things that are causing your problems, which are your character defects. And the purpose of step 5 is to have the things blocking you off from your higher power revealed. Your character defects, all of those character defects that we looked at, every one of them is a blockage towards your higher power because they're based in self. Now, as we went through and we did our fifth step, we want to prepare for the sixth step because preparation is the key. We sat down with our sponsor, we went through our inventories, and now we're preparing for step 6, which is the pre-step 6 item. And I'm going to review this because I know we did it last week. It's because it's still it's in between step 5 and step 6. And this is right out of page 75 of the big book. It states, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. Carefully reviewing what we've done, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first five proposals, which means the first 5 steps, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man or woman at last. Is our work solid? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement and put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And you want to do exactly what the instructions say to do. There's very few times in the big book where it states a time frame, but in this instance, it's very specific. It says for an hour, and a good way to do this might be to set a timer for an hour, and if you finish before the timer goes off, use the rest of the time to pray or meditate or think about things that you are grateful for. So here, the instructions for steps 4 and 5, which are the steps which deal with us, are complete. And now it's time to move to steps 6 and 7. 6 and 7 are where a shift takes place. With steps 6 and 7, we start talking to God and looking to him for his help. So step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And the next instruction, again, is on page 76, which comes right after the questions pertaining to our work being solid, and states, if we can answer to our satisfaction, we can then look at step 6. We've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Oftentimes you hear people say, I have to pray for the willingness. I have to pray for the willingness. I'm still angry. I'm still feeling something, resentment. I'm still feeling anger about this person. Help me to be willing to let go of this character defect. So this is where we start to look in the workbook, and in the workbook, you'll see on pages 49 and 150, what's called the defect asset table. And using this defect asset table, you're going to take all of the character defects that are listed on all 4 of your inventories and transfer them to this left column. This is the step 6 section of the defect asset table. So it's going to take a little while for you to do this because you have to list every one of those character defects. For right now, we're going to ignore the step 7 portion because we're only at step 6 right now. But if any character defect is listed on your inventory more than once, you only have to write it once. So then you're going to go through and you're going to list all the character defects. Now, I've only listed one as an example here. I put procrastinator because I think a lot of us can identify with being a procrastinator. I know I teach this stuff and I still struggle with it. So you're going to list all of your character defects from all of your inventories. And again, if you don't have enough room on this page, you can go onto that folder that I showed you on the share drive and download some additional copies so that there's no problem with that. So what you're doing now, this is a process where you're going to need to take some time to do it. So this is your homework in getting started with this. So what's happening here is you're getting ready to be someone you've never been before. As someone without your character defects, you're going to be a lot better than who you are with them. So the main question in step 6 is, now that I've seen that it's my character defects causing all my problems, do I want them removed? This is the pivotal point in step 6. So what you do is you read over the entire list of all your character defects. Do you want them removed? And hopefully your answer is yes. If not, that's where we ask God to help you to be willing. So that's basically the 6th step, is listing all of those character defects. And you're going to be able to look at each and every one and ask yourself, do I want this removed? Do I want this procrastination removed? Do I want this sarcastic nature to be removed? Do I want this mean-spiritedness to be removed? Do I want this self-centeredness to be removed? Do I want this selfishness to be removed? Do you want them removed? This is where you might struggle a little bit. And you might need to do some real deep prayer and meditation to be able to say, I'm willing to get rid of this. I'm not willing to get. And a biggie that used to come up a lot of times would be some people who were struggling with smoking. They got sober, but they were still smoking. And I remember one guy, someone was getting on his case about smoking, and he said, "This is the last thing I have. I'm not ready to give it up yet." But he did eventually give it up, but he just wasn't ready to give it up yet. So we have to keep praying for that willingness. Okay, so we will now go. We'll start step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. This is page 76 in the big book. And the next instruction is, this is the 7th step prayer. And when we're ready, we say, "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and the bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding." Remember, we made the decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God as we understand him in step 3. Steps 4, 5, and 6 were the start of the footwork towards turning our will and our lives over. Step 7 continues that footwork. This is where we give God permission to mold us into what he wants us to be. You got to be really careful when you say this prayer, because when they say, watch out, watch what you pray for, you might get it. This is when we're saying to God here, take every single character defect that's standing in the way of my usefulness to him and my fellows. So this is where we go back to that defect asset table. All right. And we start looking at those character defects that we listed. And this is where we look at this table here. Where's my mouse? And we have the defect, and then we have the asset, and we have two main columns of this. Therefore, for example, we're looking at the opposite of the character defect. So the example, the opposite of dishonest would be honest. The opposite of judgmental would be accepting people for who they are and what they say. So you take the list of the character defects, and in the far right column, you add your own opposite for each of the character defects that you've listed. So for example, I have procrastinator here. So if we look here, we've got procrastinator. And what that says is that the opposite of being a procrastinator is being willing to do what needs to be done immediately. And we list it in this column. Now, you're looking for behaviors that you believe are the opposite. So if this isn't what that would mean to you, maybe for you, the opposite of being a procrastinator might be that I'm on time for work and for my appointments. Whatever it is for you, because you're looking for the behaviors you believe are the opposite. So, for example, if my main character defect is being selfish, my opposite might be to ignore anything that only benefits me and to be extremely helpful. However, that might not be your definition of being unselfish. Your definition might be to stop wanting things to go your way and to stop being angry when people do not do what you want them to do, or something else. So you want to go back and make sure that you write your opposites in the second column. You're the one that decides. I've given you some examples, but that might not be what's true for you. So you decide what the opposite of that would be. So you've already got all of your character defects listed in this column. So the next thing that you're going to do, and again, this is more homework, is write what that character asset is for you in this column. And if this fits, great. But if you feel like, I'm not sure if that's really, you can work on it. You can decide exactly what it is, because we don't need to have all of our character defects lifted from us all at once, nor will they be lifted immediately. We only have to be continuously nudged in the right direction. We get those nudges from God. And when we get those nudges from God, each morning we add to our prayers. Now, you've got your list of your character defects, and you've got the list of the character assets. So each morning when you say your prayers, you want to add to it for each one of your character defects. Please, God, stop me from being whatever that character defect is, and teach me to be someone who has this character asset. And you do each one separately. So for example, please, God, stop me from being lazy and teach me to be someone who does what's needed immediately. Please, God, stop me from being jealous and teach me to be happy for others. Please, God, stop me from being mean-spirited and teach me to be kind. Throughout the day, whenever a character defect crops up, immediately stop, take a deep breath, ask God to stop you from being the character defect and teach you to be the opposite, actually naming the character defect and its opposite. And then, and this is very important, act as if you're someone who has that character defect. And you're going to continue to do this, as well as the morning prayer of asking for the character defect to be removed and taught the opposite until you get to step 10. So this is very simple. So you just go down and you make a prayer list for yourself, and you go through and you read that litany every day. Now remember, God will not immediately remove your character defects. Nature abhors a vacuum. And if the character defect is removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that will not enhance your life has a chance to come in and be the replacement. Worst case scenario is we pick up another addiction. We don't want that to happen. So God will give us many opportunities to practice the character asset. And when he thinks you've learned enough and practiced the opposite enough, he will remove the character defect. Step 7, and the use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed. And this is where we start to, this is the living life work that we do, the living life step, because as we're going along, as we're driving along, when someone cuts us off, and we tend to, I don't know about you, I have a problem with profanity. If someone cuts me off, every now and then some profanity might come out of my mouth. So now I've got to say, please God, remove the character defect of profanity and teach me how to speak in ways that I use appropriate vocabulary, or teach me to be less stressful, or teach me to be more proactive as opposed to being reactive. See, what happens is we live our lives shaped by our habits, and a habit is a past action that's repeated, or it's repeated often enough that it becomes automatic. And in Alcoholics, when we went over the disease concept in step 1, and we talked about the dysfunction in our brains act differently than non-alcoholics. And in alcoholics, our fight or flight response gets triggered very easily. And because our fight or flight response gets triggered so easily, our character defects have been repeated so often that they're automatic, unconscious, and they're our response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. And we see it happen all the time. This shows up where Bill Wilson talks about this in the STEP book, when they did the study about alcoholics, and everybody got their panties in a knot because they were insulted, because the results of the study that they did found that alcoholics were grandiose, and basically said that we were emotionally immature, is basically what that meant. And therefore we overreact to things. We overreact. We take things personally, which aren't meant personally, but we grab a hold of something, pull it in, and make it about us. Sometimes it's called, you get hooked by something. Something hooks you. Somebody says something, and we get hooked by it. We pull it in, we internalize it, and it's all about us. Having our character defects come into play to protect us may have been appropriate at some time in our lives, but they've outlived their usefulness, and instead they cause problems for us. So as a little girl, I learned to be a people pleaser. My father was a very violent alcoholic, abusive, and I learned that I had to be the good little girl. I had to be pretty. I had to be nice. I had to smile pretty. I had to do what everybody wanted me to do. That's what made me a good little girl. I had to wait on people. I had to smile nice. I didn't dare. I remember being told, think whatever you want, but don't dare say it. That's what I was told as a kid. So I learned to keep my mouth shut. And in turn, that made me be a people pleaser. I never understood until years of doing this work that when I was a people pleaser, I was being dishonest, because I was not expressing my true feelings. I was expressing what I thought you wanted me to feel and say. And I kept everything bottled up inside because that's what I had to do as a child to survive. As an adult, that did not work for me. And as adults, that does not work for us. We're taught when we come into the program that we need to accept responsibility for ourselves, our sobriety, our circumstances, and we are told to be proactive and not reactive. And it's important to understand the difference between the two. If I can find it. I actually use Dr. Stephen Covey's theory from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he provides a really good visual model of the difference between being reactive and being proactive. You see, when we're reactive, we get a stimulus and a response, and it's like the two are together. Somebody does something and we do something right away. And it's that, like when you go to the doctor and you get that little hammer on the knee and you get that automatic knee-jerk reaction. It's a physical reaction. I get a stimulus, I go right to the response. And we get distracted by things going on around us. And we're basically conditioned to respond in a particular way to a particular stimulus. A good example of this is, how many of you, besides me, when you're riding as a passenger in the car and the person has to stop real quick, you step on the brake with your foot? That's an immediate knee-jerk reaction because we step on the brake, even though there's no brake pedal there, we step on it because our brain takes that in. So we respond in a particular way to a particular stimulus. Now, when we're proactive, we have to separate that stimulus from the response, and we have to pause. And my grandmother used to say, take a deep breath and count to 10. And when we pause, we go into this space, which Stephen Covey calls the circle of concern and the circle of influence. I have this large circle, and this large circle represents everything in the universe I might have a concern about. This smaller circle in the center represents the things that I can influence, where I have some power and I have some control. Now, as I'm living my life, if I'm concentrating my energies on the things out here in the circle of concern, I am going to be miserable. I'm going to be negative. Not going to be because I'm very pessimistic, because I'm focusing my time and my energy on things out here where I have no power or control over them, because I have no influence over them. What I need to do is I have to focus my power and my energy on things over which I have some influence or control. So I want to focus my attention on things that fall within my circle of influence. Now, an interesting dynamic occurs when we do this, because it causes that circle to grow, which causes the circle of concern to be cut down because our influence grows. Now, this is where we talk about, these are the things out here that I cannot change. I can't do anything about them. The things in here are the things I can change. And this comes down to the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's the stuff out here. The courage to change the things I can, the stuff in here, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. When I'm caught up in my character defects, I'm not having the wisdom to know the difference between the two. I'm focusing my time and my energy on self, on me, and trying to impose it on you. So when I am working on my circle of influence and focusing my thoughts, my energy, my behaviors on the things that I can do something about, that is what's going to cause me to be more proactive, which brings me back to that stimulus response model, which is I get the stimulus, I pause, and that circle basically comes down to the freedom to choose, which is based on what is called the four endowments of the human personality. And the four endowments of the human personality, which only human beings have the capability of doing. Members of the animal kingdom are locked into that stimulus response model. They do not have the capability to separate it. They don't have the upper brain features that we had, the intellect to be able to separate it and examine their behavior. That's why when you see a squirrel run in the road, it turns around and runs into your car, as opposed to, because it's caught up in stimulus response. It has no intellect about what it's doing. So self-awareness is, I know these things about myself. I'm self-aware. I know I'm an alcoholic. I know I can't drink. Imagination is the ability in my mind to think things through and come up with alternatives. Conscience is understanding the difference between right and wrong, and independent will is that I have choices, and I can make those choices based on the alternatives that I come up with in my imagination, my conscience, and now I have a choice as to what I'm going to do, which is then going to lead to my response. And this really comes right down to the Serenity Prayer. This is where the Serenity Prayer is really the best tool around, because when we're proactive, we learn to develop the ability to separate ourselves and our immediate reactions and think things through. They used to say back in the day, think the drink through. Oh, if you pick up this drink, what's going to happen? So step 7 and the use of step 7 in step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations, which we might misinterpret as threatening. That's our problem in a lot of cases. We react inappropriately. Remember, something hooks us, we suck it in and we make it about us. And step 7 teaches us the things that are unmanageable in our lives, the things that upset us and the things we're afraid of. And all of these things are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us, are giving more credit and attention to these things than they deserve, and then having our character defects come into play, and they try to protect us. So, for example, I'm in a meeting. It's a discussion meeting. There's a lot of people in the meeting. The person leading the meeting is trying to manage everybody's hand. Well, I think I've got the answer to everything, so I put my hand up. I don't get called on. Someone else puts their hand on, and the leader calls on them before they call on me, and they put their hand up after I had mine up. They got my turn. Blah, blah. Now I start. The wheels start turning. They don't like me. They don't want anything. They don't want to hear what I have to say. That person is a jerk. What do they know? They've got less time than me. Blah, 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 blah. You know, we talk about that itty bitty committee that goes on in our head. This is where that stuff is going on. We're distorting reality, and we're making up the stories about it, where the reality is I had my hand up. I don't know why the person didn't call on me. Maybe they didn't see my hand. Who knows? But it's not about me. It's about a lot of people had their hands up, and sometimes you just don't see everybody's hand. It happens. If you've ever led a meeting where there are a lot of people in the room and a lot of people are putting their hands up and there's a lot of stuff going on, sometimes it just I always looked at it from the perspective of it's the group conscience. The group conscience speaks. But not everybody does. Some people take it personal. And they make it all about them. That's what this is telling us. We distort what's going on. We have what happened? This happened. Boom. There was a meeting. I had my hand up. We ran out of time. I didn't get called on. And then there's the story that I make up about that, where that leader is a jerk, that group, I don't like that group, I don't like what they're saying, they don't do it right, blah, 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 blah. That's what goes on. So now we've got to look at where are we? We're distorting reality because we're making up stories in our head. So that's basically getting us ready to move to steps 8 and 9 so that we start to correct the wreckage of the past.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.